Welcome back to my budget app series, where I attempt to create a personal finance application from scratch and document the process on YouTube. In this video, I will set up Fastify, start working on the RESTful API controllers. The first controller I will build in this video is the user's controller, and in addition to that, I will set up an authentication with JSON web tokens. Before I start working on the controllers, I want to mention a few changes I made to the models since the last video when we built them. These are relatively minor changes. First of all, you will notice if you can see all of this source code in the repository, which is public. It is linked in the video description. All of the models now extend this extended base entity class instead of the base entity class from type ORM. The reason for that is I built this class, it extends base entity, and I built it to move the validation methods which initiate the class validator validate function away from the models. The only reason for that is to not repeat these validation methods on every single class. And if I need to update them, I can update them at a single place. Just a more dry approach to validation. Besides that, you will notice that I have separate validation methods for insert and update, while in the video we had only one method, which was this one. The reason for that is that the second validation method on update skips missing properties. This is because you might update a single property and we don't want to check for all of the required properties on update, but we want to check for all of the required properties on insertion. Besides that, the only other change I've made to the models is you can see it very well in this auto-generated entity relationship diagram from the dbeaver software. This is the actual Postgres database that the type ORM models built. And these are the entities and their relationships. I added a one-to-many relationship between user and budget and user and transaction. Previously, the only relationship between user and all of the entities representing the budgets, transactions, and categories was between user and category. And that works because budget and transaction are indirectly through category budget related to category. But this foreign key right here will allow me to more efficiently, retrieve transactions per user and budgets per user, which will be a frequent operation in this API at the cost of 2 extra foreign keys, which I'm ready to take for the added performance of quick retrieval of budgets and transactions. So these are the two changes I've made to the models. Besides that, I also did a few refactorings, just fixed typos, white spaces, things like that. You can see these changes in the repository commits. They are very minor, I won't waste time in the video for them. Now let's start working on the controllers. They will be RESTful controllers and I will use Fastify. So, as always, I will open the Fastify documentation and the Getting Started guide. Even if I am pretty confident about using a framework, I still always visit the Getting Started guide and the documentation when I create a new project because changes can happen, APIs get modernized in new major versions, so you might be using an old syntax. Now, as we see, we need to install Fastify as a dependency. I will also visit the TypeScript guide. Let's see. They had a TypeScript guide. Let me just check it. Maybe it's in the reference. Here it is. TypeScript usage. So the dependencies are types node, which we already have. And that's pretty much it. Great. It works with CommonJS modules. All right, besides that, everything seems pretty standard. We have a few remarks about the methods and types, which we'll get to when we build the router. All right, so first we need to import Fastify. Let's go to index. This is where the server init will happen. Then we initialize the Fastify instance. And at this stage, the application methods will become non-static because I want to save properties in the application, like this server, which will be a Fastify instance, I think. let me do that for now until I fix the syntax errors. All right, and the main function is started from app instance now. We have an async main function, and now I can fix this syntax error, which is this server. Sorry, this was my syntax error, of course. This will be a Fastify instance. This is what I wanted to do. We need a constructor now. We want to initialize this server to Fastify. And this basically handles that row right here. All right, let's add this get method at ping for now in the main function so that we will be able to test. All right, and lastly, the last step will be to listen at a certain port. All right, so the port, I will make a config ts file in the root for some configuration. I will have a port property here, and for now let's use 3010. Just a random port that is in use. This will be an environment variable for sure. Later, I will import the config, and here we'll use config port. Error. In case of an error, console log it and exit the process. That is reasonable. This kind of error will be only a port conflict, things like that. And console log, I'll leave that for now. It is acceptable at this stage. It's okay to leave it forever, just a single console log. But yeah, it will probably get stripped by the TypeScript compiler. I think have that configuration either way. All right, so let's now run dev, the application, and to get that the server's listening on 3010, and let's test. All right, this is a good sign. Route not found. We have a route at ping, which is a get route. I should get pong. I do. Great. So the API is working. Now let's clean this up a bit. This won't be in the main function. This is unnecessary code. And we need to have a method for start HTTP server. All right. And here we'll have await this server listen. I am sure there was an overload with a promise. There are 6 overloads and we have an overload. Great. All right. Yeah, we need to pass the config. And I think it returns address, but let's test that. It should return, yeah, promise string. So this should be address. And if we want to keep this error handling, we can do so with a try catch block. Okay. In that case, console log the error and process exit 1. Of course, the console log has to be here. So this can now be replaced by this start HTTP server. The main function should be tidy like this. It should outline the main operations that are happening when the application entry point starts. In this case, we initialize the data source. We start the HTTP server. We'll have some steps in the middle of this. All right, let's test again. But yeah, everything is working. The not found message indicates that Fastify is running correctly. Okay, next up, we need to create a plugin. And that plugin, let's scroll down to plugins. Do we have? Yes, we have a plugin section in the TypeScript part. That plugin will be a controller. I'll start with the user entity. I'll create a controllers folder, of course, and I'll call the file user controller, not JavaScript TypeScript file. I call it user controller to differentiate it from the user model file. Although they're in different folders, when you open them here, that will be confusing. And here's the plugin decoration. A plugin is just a function. In that case, I use a callback plugin, non-asynchronous. And here we need to import some things, namely Fastify plugin callback, the type from Fastify. We don't need the plugin options because we won't pass options or done. Yeah, that's pretty much what we'll use. And that plugin will be called user controller, and I'll export it. And here we have the Fastify instance, which I renamed to server so that we have consistency between my index.js naming and the controllers. Less confusion can happen that way. And at this point, I'm ready to define my routes. I have specified a design, a simple design. This is by no means comprehensive. I just outlined my main controllers and some of the required methods which I know I'm going to need. This will probably have to be extended as I develop, but it's a good starting point. So starting with users, I need a get users ID to get a single user's details. Pretty standard. So to do that, let's again visit the documentation, the TypeScript documentation, because there were some details. This is a sample get method. There are some types we need to specify. Here we go. We have query string headers. In this case, I only need users, this will have an ID parameter. So I don't need all of these interfaces. I need an interface for parameters input. That I think is okay. Sorry, that is an interface. Let's call that for now I get user params. Yeah, that's all right. And the type of this will be simply ID of type integer, number, TypeScript. All right. I'll call this I generic ID params. That is unnecessary, actually. Input ID, no. Input is also unnecessary. ID parameters is fine. So here we have a generic where we have to specify that this is the type of the input params. And besides that, we will also specify a schema here in the options. And that schema will be quite simply, let's define it here. ID params schema will be a fastify schema, and it will be an object, and it's basically params ID type number. That's all it is, really. So the schema will be the ID params schema. These types, this interface and these schemas, I will probably move to a separate file, separate folder here in controllers, but that will happen in time as I am finishing my controller. So at this point, I can remove this sample body and I can work on the actual controller get method body. I'm calling the ID end route. That would be a good point to import the controller and register it. So if I import user controller, I want a method here, register controllers. And this method, I'll just call this server register, and I will register the user controller. And here I want options, specifically the prefix option, which will allow me to prefix this with a route that I want, so that I don't need to specify in each get route here. API version 1 users, this is more error prone and it's unnecessary. And actually this part I will also abstract away to config API prefix, and in the config file we'll add that API prefix API v1. The reason I include the API prefix is quite frequently used for RESTful APIs, and v1 allows me to later create another major version of this API and keep the old version in case I have parts of my application that are still using the legacy API, and keep both running on two endpoints. When I consider this in advance, it's better. So I am doing so right now. And this should register the controller. Let me see. I think I have a syntax error. Okay, plugin did not start in time. I didn't code done. I haven't coded done. I don't need options. I need done right here. Let me see. All right, all good. Now I can work, as I said, on the get method body. I need user, so I'll import that, the user model. All right, and here we're looking for one user. So I will find one by, and I'll specify the ID. I prefer to use a shorter request parameter, and we are guaranteed to have a valid ID of type number, plus this Fastify schema makes the API faster. As far as I understand, Fastify can serialize the content of the request to a more efficient body. Now we have our user here, and if we have retrieved the user successfully, I have to reply send 200 as a success code, and no, sorry, code is 200, and then send the body, which will be user. Okay, great. Now the next step, I want to define the interface for user reply, which will be user of type user, and specify it here. All right. Besides that, we need a simple check here. If user is undefined, as this is one user, we want to throw an error, user not found. All right, great. So this controller should be ready. Let's test it. So let's first check in the beaver if we have a user available. I believe I do. Yeah, user of ID 1. So I can test it directly in my browser right here. API v1, here it is, users 1. So I make a request to that. Is the server running? It absolutely is. But the route is not found. Let's troubleshoot. Here we have the get request specified. I register the controllers with this. Oh, users. This was a typo. So that was the mistake. And here we go. We find the user of ID1 with all of its properties. Okay. The next method, if I open my Notion, is to create a new user, or the registration endpoint called otherwise. So in that case, I will be making a post request. I copy the previous method for ease. I don't need params. I will have the same reply, but I will have a body here, which I'll call iUserBody. And that body will include email, first name, password, last name first, password, which is also a string. What else? We might have currency, we might not, and I think that's it. So this body is of the iUser body type, and the schema is, we need another schema. That will be the user body schema, and it will include body, but I think, let me just check how the body schema was specified first. Here in the getting started guide. Yeah, this is how the schema was specified for the body. The type is an object. The required properties are user, and user is of type object. There we go. So we have a user body schema. The schema, I believe, can also include the reply. properties. Let me check. Does it? Response, yeah. So I should include that. It might improve the performance. ID params schema and this would be the user response schema, which includes what? This is unknown. Let me check. So here we go. This is how the response schema is defined. In terms of 200 type object properties, user of type object, pretty similar to the body. Let me just check if my params schema is right. I think it is. Yeah, I remember that it is right. So this schema will have to include the ID param schema and the user response. Sorry, the user response schema. An object of these two. I'm using this spread instead of defining an individual schema for each method so that I can reuse. Here we have a user body schema and again the user response schema. I can reuse these. I need to spread user body schema. All right, let me check. ID does not exist on type unknown. What did I get wrong? Let me see. So yeah, of course I don't actually have parameters here. That's why we get a syntax error. Here we need to create a new user, so I can delete that completely. We have the user body schema input and the iUser body. That is actually wrong, I realize now. User body I would expect to be a user. All right. And actually, I could save myself typing by just saying that user should be a partial user type. Great. Okay. Can I use that directly here? No, because the user body needs to have a user property and then the user. So yeah, that's one thing to consider. Now, yeah, we have the user body input. To create a new user, I will use the user create function, which will use the request body user property. Great. And then we just await user.save. If that passes successfully, reply with code 200 and send the user. Okay. We are missing a couple of properties. Type base entity is what we get here. Yeah, I shouldn't send that. New user is what I receive here. And I should send that back. Because here we just have a base entity, while here we also have a base entity. All right, and besides that, I just forgot to see that the create expects a type, a template. It's a template function. It expects a user type so that it can return a user. Either way, we're sending back the new user to the client with code 200. If an error occurs, we will get it. Fastify will handle it and send the response appropriately. We'll test that right now. All right, let's save and see for syntax errors. Great. Now I'll use Postman. We have no syntax errors to send a post request to users. We will send a raw body of type JSON and I'll follow the specifications. I want a user object and what I need is email, first name, last name, and password. All right, this should be a valid input. So let's send the request. I get a request that I get a message that the route is not found. Let's see. Oh, the route is specified with the ID param after it. Let's save again and test. And I get back user. That is an empty object, which is not particularly good. Let me see. Let's check the database first. Okay, we have our new user. The only thing that's not great is the response. I expect user to be a full user. And here we should get it. Yes, exactly. Let's test again with a different email. After a significant time troubleshooting, I was able to figure out the issue. I haven't specified the schema correctly here, of course. User response schema should contain the properties object, where I should have the properties expected to be in that user object. In this case, I'll specify only some of them because I don't want to return all properties. The password is hashed, it's absolutely unnecessary. The party that is receiving the content, my client-side application, so I would just pass the email, first name, last name, and ID. The ID being the most important from the user object. And of course the currency. That is important to the client application because it's a user property. Besides that, I should probably define this kind of validation also in my Quest user body schema, where I would expect the possibility to have ID, email, first name, last name, password, and currency. Okay. And let's now check by creating another user. I'm at John Doe 10 right now. And we get the response back with the ID, email, first name, last name, and currency, which is absolutely correct. Let's go to the Beaver and remove some of the user records I just created. I'll leave one. Okay, great. Next up is the edit user details, update endpoint. So let's copy the user creation endpoint. We'll change that to put. The body will be the iUser body again. And we will not have this reply. I will have a different reply here. I'll define another interface, I successful reply, which will just indicate a successful reply that will be basically just a message of type string. And let's change that the update endpoint. Okay, that's a more generic reply that I will use. And I need a new response schema for response. All of these will disappear from this file, but after we define the entire component. So successful response schema. All right. And here we will have type object, properties, message of type. And all of these can go. And that's my response. Okay. So let's specify that user body schema and successful reply. Let me copy that. I always make typos on the when I type this word. It might still have typos. Whatever. That's not that critical. Now we need to do a user update. So besides, we absolutely need the user ID. So we first find the user, find one by. No, I actually have an update function. I remember now. And the criteria could be request body user ID, while the body is the partial entity. So that's request body user. Great. And I believe this is a promise that, yeah, it updates immediately. So after it finishes, it does not return the updated user, which is the reason why we will just return a success reply. That is a message saying user updated successfully. That should be enough. Okay, let's test now. We want to update this user of type of ID4 with a different name. So I will post to the put endpoint ID4, and I'll just add the first name property here. All right. And that will be John. Let's send. User updated successfully. Refresh the beaver right here. And the first name is updated. correctly. So the update endpoint is working, at least at first glance. We'll test this later. The last endpoint of the user controller will be delete. And here we expect a parameters, the same IID params. Here we'll have the ID and the same success reply. So the schema will be ID params schema and a successful response schema. Okay. And we do user delete with request params ID. That should be sufficient. We don't have an ID. Let me see what's wrong here. We have a delete endpoint, of course. ID of type number. Okay. So the schema is correct. This is also correct. Oh, okay. Here is my mistake. This was a body, not the params generic type. So let's refresh now. We want to delete this user of ID4. So make a delete request without any body, although it wouldn't hurt anything, to ID4. Send user updated successfully. I'll change this to user deleted successfully. But besides that, the user should be deleted. Yes, it is. So that controller is ready. The next step I want to do right now is to basically take these interfaces away, also these schema objects, decide if they're going to live here in the controller or outside. So all of these will go to separate files. Now to do so, the interfaces first, I'll create a types folder, and here we'll have different files. I'll have generic types.ts file, which will hold this interface as it is very generic. I user body no I successful reply as it's generic, and we use it for the other controllers as well. But besides that, these two will go to user types ts, where we'll export them. All right, here we need to import user. These generic types, use it, change the double quotes, and that file is ready. Here in generic types, export both types. They don't have any dependencies, and now I can just import these here in the file. First, the IID params and I success will reply, and then the how was it called? I user body, I user reply. Is that all? I think so. Yeah. Check. Yes. So the types can now housed in this folder, and they wouldn't clutter the controllers. In terms of the schema, I have a couple of options. I can have a schemas folder with similar generic schemas and end user schemas, and I think I'll have that. Yes, a little bit more folder, more folders and files, but overall a cleaner, more maintainable code base. I think it's pretty easy to understand the structure. So I'll import Fastify schema. All right. This is the generic schemas, which I will reuse again, like the types. Also export that. And we'll have user schemas. They could be JSON files, but that would work just fine for now. I think this is better because the syntax highlighting in JavaScript is more recognizable and appropriate. Because yeah, they have their types, which I need to import as well. All right, here we have repetition, ID, email, first name, last name, currency. I'll call these user base properties, user base props, and abstract them away. Let's see. Yes, to this object, so that I can user base props, reuse them here. And I can use them here as well. And I have all of them except password, I think. All right, export both schemas. Great. Let's save. I need to import them now. Fastify schema is no longer necessary, but I need to import ID params schema and successful response schema from this file and import user body schema and user. All right. And that pretty much leaves the controller clean with all of the methods. We have schemas and types. Great, great. We have the user controller. The next step would be to set up the JWT authentication and login. So let's do that real quick. And with that, we'll wrap this video and we'll build the other controllers in another video as they are much simpler. Now the login endpoint will be a post request to /user/login. It will have the user body schema again, I think. Yes, the user body schema with email and password. And it will have the successful, no, it needs a different response here. Not a successful response schema, but a token response schema because we'll send the JSON web token here. And that will be type object and the properties will be token of type string. The required, sorry, not user, type string right here. This will be called token and the property will be required, of course. And here we have a typo. Okay, now I can import that. So that will be the response of the login endpoint, token response schema. That is seperate right here. And here's how the login will work. We will find a user right here. Find one by email. All right. Now, if we don't find a user is undefined, we'll throw an error, valid details. The provided user details are invalid. Otherwise, we need to validate the password. So is password valid is equal to await user is password valid. This is the method we need to await here. This is the method we implemented in the model, which uses bcrypt compare. And here we can just compare the user body password. Okay. So if not is password valid, we'll throw the same error. I will abstract this away because it will be repeated twice. I will save this in variable. I won't abstract it away. Interesting way to say it. It is true though, but whatever. So here we have two checks. First, if the user exists. Second, if the password is valid. And if we pass through these two checks, at the end, we generate a token, which I'll do in a bit, and reply with code 200 and send the token. Okay, that's basically it. Here, we need iToken or token or iToken by, I'll call it. Let's go to the types. And I'll have the replies last so that it's ordered. Token of type string. Okay. User controllers. Import iToken reply here. Good. And now everything is fine, except that we still don't have JWT authentication. To do that, I'll look for fastify-jwt. There's a project like this, which is utilities for JSON Web Tokens in Fastify. Now, to use this, it is simple. As you can see, we can abstract it to a plugin using the Fastify plugin module. And that's exactly what I will do, except we use TypeScript, but that's not that important in this case. So I'll make in the source folder a plugins directory for these global Fastify plugins, and I'll call this alt. Okay, I'll first install the Fastify plugin dependency. I know that it has TypeScript support, so I can do this Fastify plugin. Okay, Let me just change the quotes again. Superb. All right. Now, common JS and stuff, we need to rewrite this pretty much completely to comply with the TypeScript requirements. But a plugin is essentially just a function. So I'll call it out plugin in my case and prepare the function. That function will be a Fastify plugin callback, which I want to import first, apparently, because I didn't want to import it in a smart way. So this will be a Fastify plugin callback, and that function, what is the error being thrown? Oh, I don't have a TypeScript file. That's why it didn't read as well. Here we have Fastify, we have options, and then done. Okay. And we can pass this. First of all, here we have server. That's how we call it everywhere. We can register the plugin that is not this require, but it's actually, I need to pull that as well. So save fastify-jwt to install it like that. Let me check. Yes. Okay, let's see TypeScript usage here for the imports. Okay, just fastify-jwt from the default export. Great. And what else? Here we registered that plugin. The secret option will be in the config file. It will be an environment variable. So import the config file and add this property. I'll leave super secret for now. It's fine. We have to change it later for sure. I don't know. I won't need options. I'll need done. And last, decorate with this authenticate method. The quotes again. This is an asynchronous function that I'll rewrite to arrow. Hopefully that won't cause issues. I don't see a this used right here, so it's fine. Request, reply. So it will try to, it has an any type. So this needs to be a fastify request, I think. Be a fastify fly. Here we have pick. I don't think I need to annotate this, do I? Apparently I need to. Okay, whatever. This returns a promise void. I annotated it completely. Apparently I need to. Whatever. Here we await JWT verify function that is already attached. And in case of an error, we send it back. Fastify handles the formatting and sending the error back. So all I need to do is done lastly. And here I can export default, wrap this in the Fastify plugin. The Fastify plugin npm package, what it does. So plugins in Fastify are usually scoped. What this means is I will register the JWT and it will work only within this plugin. I don't want that. I want it to work globally. That's what this plugin does. It exposes a plugin that works globally. And JWT is such a plugin, JWT Authentication. So now I can just import that plugin from, import auth from plugins auth. All right. And I can register this. I will create a separate method, register plugins, that I'll call without before the controllers. And this will just, this server register, it will just call this server register auth. All right, and now the last step, go back to our user's controller. Now we can generate the token. Let me see here. The post request, token is equal to, I believe, request JWT. Okay, sign. And was it like that? Let me check. Yes, request or reply JWT sign. I think it was in the beginning, the usage. Yes, fastify-jwt sign. Okay, it's the server JWT sign. Here we go. And this accepts what? Payload. So the payload will be user. User that we already found right here. All right, great. Save and let's test. I have one user in the database, I believe. I can create one if not, but yeah, I have one. So we make a post request to users login with a raw JSON body. It just needs to have an email and a password. Okay, and let's send it. Oh, the server is not running. Of course, I stopped it to install the dependencies. We have a syntax error. JWT does not exist on type. Okay, our config doesn't have the JWT. It does actually, but it's not saved maybe? Okay, I see. That makes sense. Now the server is running and I can validate the endpoint finally. Run, but request body must have required property token. Let me see. I have a wrong post. I user body, I token body. Token response schema. We check. Okay. That should be a response schema, not a body schema for the server. Okay. Yeah. So the response schema needs to have a different format, of course. This is the response in case of a 200 successful response, basically. 200 code HTTP response. Let's test again. And we get our token. The great thing about Fastify JWT is now we can use this plugin we made to gate a certain request with this on request hook and then use server authenticate. So that's awesome. This way we can basically keep some of our endpoints only for authenticated users. This will be most of our endpoints. All right, at this point, I will stop the video. We have built our user controller, which was the most complicated one because we needed to implement the user authentication as well and set up Fastify. I will leave the rest of the controllers for the next video as they will be more straightforward, classical controllers that just manipulate data. And we will for sure need to modify this controller in the future as we progress with the development, but this is a great start. With this, I'll wrap today's video. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to subscribe to get notified when another video is released. Take care.